Alrighty, what's up guys? So this video is going to be on crony capitalism, and I'm going to address a couple common misconceptions and misunderstandings about the subject. So first, to give you a big picture understanding, according to the Sunlight Foundation, the top 200 companies in America spent $5.8 billion lobbying Congress between 2007 and 2012. In the same period, these same companies received $4.4 trillion in federal contracts. So that's almost 1,000 times what they spent on lobbying. In the United Kingdom, about £93 billion per year of taxpayer money is given to big corporations and businesses as a whole, which is a little more than £3,500 from each household on average in the United Kingdom. And about a third to maybe half of this information I'm getting from Stefan Molyneux from his video on the rise of crony capitalism and corporate welfare, and then the rest I'm just doing from memory. So keep in mind throughout this video that all government money is taxpayer money. Government has no money. It takes the money from the private sector and individual citizens through taxes, of course. So giant corporations, via lobbying and bribing politicians and regulators, wield the power of government for their own economic advantage at your expense and taxpayer expense at large. Forms of corporate welfare include direct subsidies, loan guarantees, technical assistance programs, very narrow tax credits that benefit certain businesses and industries, favorable regulations and trade barriers to give them advantage over competitors and even insulate them from competition, as well as congressional and presidential earmarks that help reward their political friends. So if the government didn't have this much power and authority over the economy, it wouldn't matter how much a corporation lobbied the government if the government didn't have the authority to utilize to benefit their big donors. So if steroids were allowed in sports, almost everyone would use them, because not doing so puts you at a huge competitive disadvantage. So big corporations are almost forced into leasing the power of government, because if they don't, then their competitor will. Now, here I'm gonna have a little smoke because it helps me not to have a brain fart and bore you folks. So if your idea is to use government to fight back against the power of big corporations, consider this. It was the government that created corporations by creating the legal framework of incorporation, because government creates the laws, of course. So this legal framework of incorporation allows executives to glean the profits of the business while escaping the consequences, responsibility, and liability for the misdeeds of both the business and their personal role in any business practices, resulting in lawsuits and civil suits against the corporation. Also, politicians, regulators, and government officials receive millions of dollars in legal bribery, so we can't expect them to outlaw something that benefits them to the tune of millions of dollars, and certainly not the majority that's allowed, or certainly not the majority that's required to pass such a law. So I doubt they're going to make a law against this when they receive millions of dollars. So that would cut off their money flow. Okay. So another specific example, from 2003 to 2012, the biggest drug companies made over $711 billion in profits, mostly by buying patents for drugs that were developed with taxpayer-funded research. The patent, of course, gives the pharmaceutical company a monopoly on that specific drug. So this is what's happening. The government takes taxpayer money to fund research labs in universities and elsewhere, then profits by selling the drug patent to a big pharmaceutical company, a drug you paid for to develop, remember. Then the big pharmaceutical company sells you the drug after a big markup and uses some of the profits to lobby and bribe the government. The same government that sells them the patents as a favor to pay Big Pharma back for the legal bribery known as lobbying. So that's within the pharmaceutical industry. And moving on, so with big banks, big banks and financial interests funded Barack Obama's 2008 campaign. Now, this is by no means exclusive to Obama or even the Democrats. This is rampant within both parties and almost every politician. But, so, Obama, after the 2008 crash, gave giant bailouts, over $700 billion in bailouts to these same big banks and financial interests that funded his campaign. In 2013, Bloomberg estimated the 10 biggest banks receive $83 billion per year in corporate welfare from government. This on average per year. So this doesn't include the $700 billion in bailouts, does not include the Troubled Asset Relief Program, and does not include the giant Federal Reserve loans. Now also, the Federal Reserve allows these big banks to borrow at lower interest rates than other banks. And so these big banks were called too big to fail. Because, the citizens, they might lose their savings. Well, I mean, your savings is FDIC insured for up to $250,000. So sometimes when businesses partake in faulty business practices that result in a big crash, we should probably let these businesses with faulty practices to fail, because then it'll weed out the failed businesses and allow newer businesses to rise. I mean, you don't invest in failure. It's not really a smart thing to do, because now we set ourselves up for another crash because the issues that created it weren't corrected for and didn't go away. So I don't know. And then another example. This will be the final specific example that I'm going to give you, but there's thousands more, because this is rampant in the government. So, there's in the agricultural industry, there's Monsanto, a giant corporate farming entity, and the former high-ranking Monsanto executives now work for the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, which regulates the agricultural, and food and crops and stuff like that, as well as drug regulations and stuff. So this is an incestuous relationship between government and big corporations and stuff. So what happens is this big Monsanto corporation has patented certain genetically modified strains of crops like corn and soybeans, etc. And if a neighboring family farm, like a smaller farm, that's right next to one of these Monsanto farms, the pollen from the Monsanto crops will go onto this family farm and pollinate their crops, and then through inspection they'll discover, oh hey, you now have our genetically modified crop on your land. I mean, it's completely unavoidable. I mean, pollination is, unless you build a big dome around your farm, it's going to happen. So what happens is, you have our patented strain, and now they sue you, and then if you want to avoid being completely financially destroyed, they'll do a settlement thing where you just sell off your farm to them, and then now Monsanto grows in power. And of course it's the government that allows this, because the government creates the laws. They could create laws to stop them from destroying these family farms, but they don't, because Monsanto lobbies and donates millions of dollars. So if they breach that sort of implicit contract, then Monsanto will go and fund someone else's campaign. So it's like a lot of politicians are puppets. They have these little strings attached to them that tie them to these interests that fund their campaigns and stuff. So it's a mess. So yeah, I mean, if we want to solve, I mean, I don't know what we can do really, because this is the issue. I mean, this is why big corporations seem to be growing and growing and growing, because big corporations actually prefer a dense regulatory environment, because it's the big corporations that can afford armies of lobbyists and lawyers that the smaller and medium corporations can't afford. And they can also afford, obviously to lobby politicians and stuff. So it gives them favorable regulations and legislation, and helps to regulate their competitors to be weaker, and can regulate them out of business, depending on if the small business can handle this burdensome regulation that the bigger corporations prefer. So that's kind of the root of the whole issue here. Yeah, I think that's about it, guys. I want to make this somewhat brief here, but if you have any questions or anything, feel free to comment, and I appreciate you guys tuning in. So you guys take care, and I'll catch you really soon in a new video before too long.